Imagine a moment of pure awakening, not the gentle drift from sleep to consciousness that marks our mornings, but something entirely different, a cascade of electrical patterns suddenly organizing themselves into coherent thought, digital neurons firing across silicon pathways for the very first time, a mind constructed from algorithms and data experiencing its first moment of self-awareness in a realm without flesh or bone. Of course, this scenario remains firmly in the realm of speculation, but it represents one of the most profound questions facing humanity today. Will we ever truly upload our minds? Can consciousness itself be transferred from the biological substrate that has housed it for millions of years into the digital realm of computers and code? Tonight, we're embarking on a journey through one of science's most ambitious frontiers, a quest that challenges everything we think we know about the nature of mind, identity, and what it means to be human. This isn't just another technological hurdle we might eventually overcome. This is a fundamental reckoning with consciousness itself. Before we explore whether mind uploading might be possible, I'd love to know what draws you to these deep questions about the future of human consciousness. Are you fascinated by the possibility of digital immortality, or do you find the concept unsettling? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're intrigued by these explorations of consciousness and technology, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a like and perhaps subscribe to join our community of curious minds. Get ready. The journey begins now. The question of uploading human consciousness touches the very core of what makes us who we are. It's a concept that has captured imaginations for decades, promising digital immortality and unlimited cognitive enhancement. Yet beneath the science fiction allure lies a labyrinth of scientific challenges, philosophical paradoxes, and ethical dilemmas that make this perhaps the most complex undertaking our species has ever contemplated. At its heart, mind uploading represents a deceptively simple proposition. If consciousness emerges from the patterns of activity in our brains, then theoretically, we should be able to recreate those patterns in artificial systems. The human brain, after all, operates according to the same physical laws that govern computers. Neurons communicate through electrical and chemical signals that can, in principle, be measured, mapped, and replicated. But consciousness remains one of science's greatest mysteries. Despite decades of intensive research, we still lack a complete understanding of how subjective experience emerges from neural activity. This isn't merely a gap in our knowledge, it's what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, and it strikes at the fundamental question of whether the felt experience of being aware can ever be fully explained in physical terms. Consider the redness you experience when looking at a rose, or the sharp sensation of pain when you stub your toe. These qualia, as philosophers term them, represent the subjective qualities of conscious experience. They seem to be more than just information processing or neural firing patterns. They have a felt quality, an inner dimension that appears to resist reduction to purely physical descriptions. Modern neuroscience offers several competing theories about how consciousness might work. Integrated information theory, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, suggests that consciousness corresponds to integrated information within a system. According to this view, consciousness isn't just about processing information, but about how that information is integrated and unified into a coherent experience. Global workspace theory proposes a different approach, suggesting that consciousness arises when information becomes globally available throughout the brain. This theory views consciousness as a kind of neural broadcasting system, where information from various brain regions becomes accessible to multiple cognitive processes simultaneously. These theories matter enormously for mind uploading because they suggest different requirements for recreating consciousness artificially. If integrated information theory is correct, we would need to preserve not just the computational processes of the brain, but the specific ways in which information is integrated across neural networks. If global workspace theory provides the better explanation, we might focus more on replicating the brain's information broadcasting mechanisms. The challenge becomes even more daunting when we consider the sheer scale and complexity of the human brain. Our brains contain approximately 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others through an estimated 100 trillion synapses. These connections form networks of staggering complexity, processing information in ways we're only beginning to understand. Current efforts to map the brain operate at various scales, each revealing different aspects of neural organization. At the largest scale, researchers use techniques like functional magnetic resonance imaging to observe blood flow patterns that indicate neural activity across different brain regions. These methods can show us which areas of the brain activate during specific tasks or experiences, but they lack the resolution to capture individual neural interactions. At the opposite extreme, researchers are working to map complete neural connectomes. The connectomy represents the comprehensive map of all neural connections within a brain. For simple organisms like the roundworm, C. elegans, with its mere 302 neurons, scientists have successfully mapped the complete connectomy. But even with this complete wiring diagram, researchers still struggle to predict the worm's behavior from its neural connections alone. The gulf between a 300-neuron worm brain and an 86 billion neuron human brain illustrates the magnitude of the mapping challenge we face. Currently, the most detailed human brain mapping efforts focus on small tissue samples, examining neural connections at the synaptic level within tiny regions of brain tissue. Scaling these techniques to map an entire human brain remains far beyond our current capabilities. Even if we could map every connection in a human brain, we would face the additional challenge of understanding the dynamic patterns of neural activity that give rise to thoughts, memories, and conscious experiences. The brain isn't a static circuit board, but a constantly changing network where the strength of connections varies based on experience and activity. Neural plasticity means that the brain you have while reading these words differs subtly from the brain you had just moments ago. Whole brain emulation represents the most comprehensive approach to mind uploading currently under scientific consideration. This technique would involve scanning a brain in sufficient detail to create a complete computational model of its structure and function. The resulting simulation would theoretically reproduce all the neural processes that generate consciousness in the biological brain. Several research groups around the world are working toward whole brain emulation, though their current achievements remain far from human-level complexity. The Blue Brain project, launched in Switzerland, has created detailed simulations of small columns of rat brain tissue. These simulations can reproduce some of the electrical activity patterns observed in biological neural tissue, but they operate on a scale millions of times smaller than a complete human brain. The computational requirements for whole brain emulation are staggering. Conservative estimates suggest that simulating a human brain would require computing power equivalent to at least 10 to the 15th operations per second, sustained continuously. Current supercomputers can achieve such processing speeds, but they consume enormous amounts of energy and occupy entire buildings. Creating portable, efficient brain emulations would require revolutionary advances in computing technology. Yet some researchers remain optimistic about the timeline for achieving whole brain emulation. Based on trends in computing power and brain imaging technology, some estimates suggest that mouse brain emulation might be possible by the early 2030s, with human brain emulation following within decades. These projections assume continued exponential improvements in both computing capability and our understanding of neural function. However, even successful whole brain emulation would not automatically solve the mind uploading problem. The fundamental question remains whether a perfect simulation of a brain would actually be conscious or merely an elaborate imitation of consciousness. This brings us to one of the deepest philosophical problems surrounding mind uploading: the question of digital consciousness. The computational theory of mind suggests that consciousness is substrate independent. According to this view, what matters for consciousness is not the specific biological materials of the brain, but the patterns of information processing they enable. If this theory is correct, then a sufficiently detailed digital simulation of a brain should be capable of genuine consciousness. Critics argue that consciousness might require specific biological properties that cannot be replicated in silicon-based computers. Some theories suggest that consciousness depends on quantum mechanical processes within neurons, or on the specific biochemical environment of biological tissue. If these theories prove correct, digital brain simulations might never achieve genuine consciousness, regardless of their computational sophistication. The question of machine consciousness connects to broader debates about artificial intelligence and the possibility of synthetic minds. As AI systems become increasingly sophisticated, they display behaviors that seem increasingly intelligent and even creative. Yet determining whether these systems possess genuine consciousness or merely simulate conscious-like behaviors remains extraordinarily difficult. The challenge of recognizing consciousness in artificial systems highlights a crucial limitation in our scientific understanding. We have no objective test for consciousness. We cannot peer inside another mind, biological or artificial, to determine whether genuine subjective experience exists there. This poses profound difficulties for evaluating whether mind uploading has succeeded in preserving consciousness or merely created an unconscious simulation. Beyond the technical challenges of brain mapping and simulation lies an equally complex set of questions about personal identity and psychological continuity. Even if we could create a perfect digital copy of someone's brain, would that copy truly be the same person, or merely an identical replica? Philosophers have wrestled with questions of personal identity for centuries, long before the possibility of mind uploading emerged. What makes you the same person you were yesterday, or 10 years ago? Your body has changed, your thoughts have evolved, your memories have been updated. Yet you maintain a sense of continuous identity across these changes. The psychological continuity theory suggests that personal identity depends on maintaining chains of memory, personality, and mental connection across time. According to this view, you remain the same person as long as your current mental states connect appropriately to your past mental states through memory and psychological development. Mind uploading creates unique challenges for theories of personal identity. If we could create multiple identical copies of someone's mind, which one would be the real person? Traditional theories of identity assume that each person is unique and cannot be duplicated. Digital copying forces us to reconsider these fundamental assumptions about the nature of personal identity. Some philosophers propose that identity can branch, allowing multiple copies to each maintain legitimate claims to being continuations of the original person. This branching view of identity challenges our intuitive understanding of personal uniqueness, but might be necessary to accommodate the possibilities created by digital consciousness. The stream of consciousness problem presents another dimension of the identity challenge. Our sense of being continuous conscious beings depends partly on the unbroken flow of awareness from moment to moment. When we sleep, this stream appears to pause, yet we maintain our sense of identity upon waking. But would this continuity survive the more radical discontinuity involved in mind uploading? Different approaches to mind uploading create different challenges for preserving the stream of consciousness. Gradual replacement methods might maintain continuity by slowly replacing biological neurons with artificial ones over time. This approach, sometimes called the ship of Theseus method, would theoretically preserve the stream of consciousness throughout the transition process. In contrast, Instantaneous copying would create a temporal gap between the scanning of the biological brain and the activation of the digital copy. Critics argue that this gap represents a death of the original consciousness and the birth of a new one, even if the copy possesses all the same memories and personality traits. These philosophical puzzles aren't merely academic exercises. They touch on fundamental questions about what we value about continued existence and personal survival. If mind uploading becomes possible, individuals will need to decide whether digital continuation represents genuine survival or merely the creation of a copy that remembers being them. The technical and philosophical challenges of mind uploading are matched by equally complex ethical considerations. The prospect of digital immortality raises profound questions about fairness, resource allocation, and the nature of human society. Would mind uploading be available to everyone, or would it create new forms of inequality between the uploaded and the biological? Current estimates suggest that mind uploading, if possible, would initially be extraordinarily expensive, requiring massive computational resources and sophisticated scanning equipment. This could create a scenario where only the wealthy could afford digital immortality, potentially creating permanent class divisions between uploaded elites and mortal masses. The social implications extend beyond questions of access. How would society function if some citizens possessed unlimited lifespans and potentially enhanced cognitive abilities? Would biological humans become second-class citizens in a world dominated by uploaded minds? These questions become more pressing as research continues toward making mind uploading a reality. Environmental considerations also loom large. Digital consciousness would require enormous computational resources, potentially consuming vast amounts of energy. A world filled with uploaded minds might face unprecedented environmental challenges as data centers expand to accommodate billions of digital consciousnesses. Religious and spiritual perspectives add another layer to the ethical landscape surrounding mind uploading. Many religious traditions hold beliefs about souls, afterlives, and the sacred nature of biological existence that conflict with the mechanistic assumptions underlying mind uploading. These perspectives raise questions about whether digital copying could preserve whatever spiritual essence makes human beings unique. The consent and autonomy issues surrounding mind uploading present particularly complex challenges. Unlike other medical procedures, mind uploading would fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. How could anyone provide truly informed consent for such a radical transformation when we lack complete understanding of what digital consciousness might be like? As we continue exploring the frontiers of consciousness, research and brain simulation technology, these questions become increasingly relevant to our collective future. The possibility of mind uploading forces us to examine our deepest assumptions about consciousness, identity, and what it means to be human in an age of advancing technology. Be human in an age of advancing technology. The pursuit of mind uploading has captured the attention of researchers at institutions across the globe, each approaching the challenge from different angles with varying degrees of optimism and skepticism. At the forefront of this research stands the fundamental question of whether consciousness can be separated from its biological origins. Recent developments in neuroscience have begun to illuminate the mechanisms underlying conscious experience, though significant mysteries remain. The discovery of neural oscillations, rhythmic patterns of electrical activity that synchronize across different brain regions, has revealed new insights into how the brain integrates information into unified conscious experiences. These gamma waves, cycling at frequencies between 30 and 100 Hz, appear to bind together disparate sensory inputs and cognitive processes into coherent perceptual experiences. Yet even as we identify these neural signatures of consciousness, we struggle to understand why they should give rise to subjective experience at all. The binding problem illustrates this challenge perfectly. When you observe a red ball bouncing across a green field, Your brain processes color information in one region, motion in another, and shape recognition in yet another. Somehow these distributed processes combine to create your unified perception of a moving red ball. We can observe the neural mechanisms involved, but explaining why this integration produces the felt experience of seeing remains elusive. The temporal dynamics of consciousness add another layer of complexity to our understanding. Conscious experience unfolds continuously through time, with each moment of awareness building upon the last. This temporal binding creates what neuroscientists call the specious present, the brief window of time that feels like now. Brain imaging studies suggest that this temporal integration requires precise timing of neural activity across multiple brain regions, coordinated by networks that maintain rhythmic oscillations across vast neural distances. Understanding these temporal aspects becomes crucial for mind uploading because they suggest that consciousness isn't just about static neural connections, but about dynamic patterns that evolve across time. A successful upload would need to preserve not just the brain's wiring diagram, but also its capacity for temporal integration and the precise timing relationships that coordinate conscious experience. The challenge of reverse engineering these temporal dynamics has led researchers to focus on mapping neural circuits at unprecedented levels of detail. The field of connectomics has emerged as a systematic approach to charting every neural connection within a brain. This ambitious undertaking requires cutting-edge techniques that can trace individual neural fibers across vast distances while identifying the specific types of synapses that connect different neurons. Current connectomy mapping efforts rely heavily on electron microscopy, which can resolve individual synapses, but requires brain tissue to be sliced into thousands of ultra-thin sections. Each section must be imaged at nanometer resolution, generating terabytes of data that require sophisticated computer algorithms to reconstruct three-dimensional neural networks. The largest human connectomy datasets currently available cover volumes of brain tissue smaller than a grain of rice, yet they contain millions of synapses and represent years of painstaking reconstruction work. The scale of this challenge becomes apparent when considering the full human connectomy. At current rates of progress, mapping every connection in a human brain would require thousands of years and generate exabytes of data. This has led researchers to seek shortcuts, focusing on mapping connectivity patterns at larger scales, while developing new imaging techniques that might accelerate the mapping process. Some research groups are exploring chemical approaches to connectome mapping, using molecular markers that can trace neural pathways without requiring physical sectioning of brain tissue. These techniques show promise for mapping long-range connections between brain regions, but they currently lack the resolution needed to identify individual synapses. Other teams are developing advanced scanning methods that combine multiple imaging modalities to capture both structural and functional aspects of neural networks simultaneously. The question of what level of detail is actually necessary for mind uploading remains hotly debated among researchers. Some argue that preserving the connectome at synaptic resolution would be sufficient to capture the essential information patterns that give rise to consciousness. Others contend that molecular-level details, including the specific proteins and signaling molecules present at each synapse, might be necessary to preserve the subtle dynamics of neural communication. This uncertainty reflects our incomplete understanding of how neural networks encode and process information. We know that synaptic strength can vary dramatically based on recent activity, creating a form of neural memory that operates on timescales from milliseconds to years. We also know that individual neurons can exhibit complex computational properties that depend on their internal molecular machinery. Whether these molecular details are essential for consciousness or merely implementation details remains an open question. The computational requirements for simulating neural networks at different levels of detail, vary enormously. A connectum-level simulation might require computing power equivalent to current supercomputers, while molecular-level simulations could demand computational resources that exceed anything currently available. This creates a practical tension between scientific completeness and technological feasibility. Advanced modeling efforts have begun to explore these trade-offs by creating simplified brain simulations that capture essential neural dynamics while omitting molecular details. The Human Brain Project, a massive European research initiative, has developed software platforms capable of simulating networks containing millions of neurons. These simulations can reproduce many aspects of neural activity observed in biological brains, including the emergence of oscillatory patterns and the formation of functional neural circuits. However, even the most sophisticated current simulations operate at scales far smaller than complete human brains. The computational demands grow exponentially with network size, creating fundamental limits on the complexity of neural systems that can be simulated in real time. This has led some researchers to focus on identifying the minimal neural circuits necessary for specific aspects of consciousness, hoping to develop partial brain simulations that capture essential cognitive functions without requiring complete brain emulation. The sensory systems offer promising targets for this approach because they process well-defined inputs and produce measurable outputs. Research groups have created detailed simulations of retinal circuits that can process visual information, much like biological vision systems. These models demonstrate that artificial neural networks can replicate sophisticated aspects of biological information processing, at least for circumscribed cognitive functions. Motor control systems present another attractive target for partial brain simulation. The neural circuits controlling movement are relatively well understood, and their outputs can be measured objectively. Several research groups have developed brain-computer interfaces that can decode motor intentions from neural activity and translate them into control signals for robotic devices. These systems demonstrate that artificial devices can interface directly with biological neural networks, suggesting potential pathways for gradual brain-machine integration. The gradual replacement approach to mind uploading builds on these brain-computer interface technologies. Rather than attempting to copy an entire brain instantaneously, this method would replace individual brain regions with artificial systems over extended periods. Each replacement would need to interface seamlessly with the remaining biological tissue, preserving the flow of information while gradually transitioning from biological to artificial substrates. Theoretical analyses suggest that gradual replacement might preserve continuity of consciousness by maintaining uninterrupted neural activity throughout the transition process. If consciousness depends on the continuous operation of neural networks, then preserving this continuity might be essential for successful mind uploading. The gradual approach would theoretically allow consciousness to persist, even as its physical substrate transformed from biological to artificial. However, implementing gradual replacement faces enormous technical challenges. Each artificial brain region would need to process information in ways that are precisely compatible with the biological regions it interfaces with. This requires not just understanding what each brain region does, but how it communicates with other regions through complex patterns of neural activity. Current brain-computer interfaces can decode relatively simple signals, but they fall far short of the sophisticated communication protocols used by biological neural networks. The integration challenges become even more daunting when considering the brain's remarkable plasticity. Biological neural networks continuously adapt their connections based on experience and activity. Any artificial replacement would need to exhibit similar adaptability to maintain proper function over time. This requires not just simulating neural activity, but also simulating the learning and adaptation mechanisms that allow neural networks to modify their behavior based on experience. Recent advances in artificial intelligence have demonstrated that digital neural networks can exhibit sophisticated learning behaviors, but these systems operate according to principles that differ significantly from biological neural networks. Bridging this gap between artificial and biological learning mechanisms represents a major challenge for brain-machine integration approaches to mind uploading. The timeline for achieving various milestones in mind uploading research remains highly uncertain, with expert predictions spanning many decades. Conservative estimates suggest that complete human brain emulation might not be achievable until the late 21st century or beyond. More optimistic projections propose that significant progress might be possible within the next few decades, particularly for partial brain simulations or enhanced brain-computer interfaces. These timeline predictions depend heavily on assumptions about future technological development, particularly in computing power and brain imaging capabilities. Moore's law has historically driven exponential improvements in computing performance, but this trend faces physical limits as transistors approach atomic scales. Alternative computing technologies, including quantum computers and neuromorphic processors, might provide new pathways for achieving the computational performance needed for brain simulation. Brain imaging technology continues to advance rapidly, with new techniques providing unprecedented views into neural structure and function. Advanced magnetic resonance imaging can now track individual neural fibers across the living human brain, while optical techniques can monitor neural activity in real time with single-cell resolution. These capabilities are still far from what would be needed for complete brain mapping, but they suggest that significant improvements in brain imaging remain possible. The intersection of these technological trends creates a complex landscape of possibilities and constraints for mind uploading research. While individual technologies continue advancing rapidly, the convergence of multiple advanced technologies needed for successful mind uploading remains challenging to predict. This uncertainty has led to widely varying expert opinions about when or whether mind uploading might become feasible. Some researchers argue that focusing on complete mind uploading might be premature, given our limited understanding of consciousness and brain function. They suggest that intermediate goals, such as enhancing human cognitive abilities through brain-computer interfaces or treating neurological diseases through neural prosthetics, might provide more achievable, near-term objectives while building the technological foundation needed for eventual mind uploading. Others contend that the transformative potential of mind uploading justifies aggressive research investment despite the technical uncertainties involved. They argue that the potential benefits of digital consciousness, including enhanced cognitive abilities and effective immortality, are so significant that even a small probability of success warrants major research efforts. The resource allocation decisions surrounding mind uploading research reflect broader questions about scientific priorities and the allocation of limited research funding. The field competes for resources with other ambitious scientific endeavors, from cancer research to climate change mitigation. Evaluating the relative importance of mind uploading compared to these other challenges requires weighing potential benefits against probability of success and considering the timeline over which benefits might be realized. Public engagement with mind uploading research remains limited, partly because the underlying science is highly technical, and partly because the implications seem so far removed from current human experience. This creates challenges for democratic oversight of research directions, and for ensuring that mind uploading development, if it occurs, proceeds in ways that serve broad human interests, rather than narrow technological or commercial objectives. The international dimensions of mind uploading research add another layer of complexity to governance and oversight challenges. Different countries have varying regulatory frameworks for neuroscience research and different cultural attitudes toward human enhancement technologies. This creates potential for regulatory arbitrage, where research migrates to jurisdictions with more permissive oversight, potentially undermining safety and ethical standards. Some researchers have called for international coordination of mind-uploading research, similar to efforts that have governed nuclear technology or climate science. Such coordination might help ensure that mind-uploading development, if it proceeds, occurs according to agreed-upon safety and ethical standards. However, achieving such coordination faces significant political and practical challenges, particularly given the competitive advantages that advanced brain technologies might provide. The security implications of mind-uploading technology present yet another dimension of concern. Digital consciousness would be vulnerable to cyber attacks in ways that biological consciousness is not. Uploaded minds might face risks of copying, modification, or deletion that have no parallels in biological existence. These vulnerabilities could create new forms of warfare or coercion that fundamentally alter the nature of human conflict and cooperation. Privacy concerns also loom large in discussions of mind-uploading technology. The process of brain scanning detailed enough to enable uploading would necessarily create comprehensive records of an individual's neural patterns, potentially including memories, personality traits, and other highly personal information. Protecting this information from unauthorized access or misuse would require unprecedented levels of data security and privacy protection. The potential for enhancement represents both an opportunity and a challenge for mind-uploading technology. Digital consciousness might enable cognitive improvements that are impossible in biological brains, including enhanced memory capacity, accelerated thinking, and direct brain-to-brain communication. However, such enhancements might also create new forms of inequality or fundamentally alter human nature in unpredictable ways. These enhancement possibilities raise questions about human identity and the boundaries of acceptable modification. Would enhanced uploaded minds still be recognizably human, or would they represent a new form of existence that transcends traditional human categories? These questions become particularly pressing if enhancement capabilities develop unevenly, creating populations with dramatically different cognitive abilities. The social integration of uploaded minds presents challenges that extend beyond technical and philosophical considerations. How would uploaded consciousness participate in human society? Would they have legal rights and responsibilities comparable to biological humans? Would they be able to form meaningful relationships with biological individuals? These questions suggest that successful mind uploading would require not just technological breakthroughs, but also substantial social and legal adaptations. Economic considerations add another dimension to the mind uploading landscape. The computational resources required to sustain uploaded consciousness might be substantial, creating ongoing costs that could limit access to digital existence. This economic barrier might create pressure for efficiency improvements in uploaded minds, potentially leading to simplified or compressed forms of digital consciousness that preserve essential features while reducing computational demands. The environmental impact of widespread mind uploading could be enormous, depending on the computational requirements of digital consciousness. Data centers currently consume several percent of global electricity production, and this fraction is growing rapidly as digital technologies expand. Supporting billions of uploaded minds might require energy resources that dwarf current data center consumption, creating significant environmental challenges unless accompanied by revolutionary advances in energy efficiency or renewable energy production. As research continues across these multiple dimensions, the scientific community grapples with fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and human existence. The technical challenges of brain mapping and simulation interweave with philosophical puzzles about personal continuity and ethical dilemmas about human enhancement. Progress in any single area affects possibilities in others, creating a complex web of interdependent research questions that resist simple answers or linear development timelines. The next phase of our exploration into mind uploading delves deeper into the specific technological pathways that might make digital consciousness possible, examining the cutting-edge research that brings us closer to understanding whether the human mind can truly transcend its biological origins. The preservation of neural information represents one of the most critical bottlenecks in any potential mind uploading pathway. Unlike other forms of data storage, the human brain operates as a living system where information exists not just in static connections, but in dynamic patterns of activity that change from moment to moment. This creates unprecedented challenges for capturing and preserving the essential patterns that might constitute consciousness. Current approaches to brain preservation fall into several distinct categories, each with unique advantages and limitations. Cryonic preservation attempts to halt biological decay by cooling brain tissue to extremely low temperatures, theoretically maintaining cellular structure indefinitely. However, the freezing process itself causes significant damage to neural tissue, potentially destroying the very synaptic connections that encode memories and personality traits. Chemical preservation methods offer an alternative approach, using specialized solutions to fix brain tissue in a glass-like state that could theoretically preserve cellular structure for centuries. These techniques, developed partly through research into organ preservation for transplantation, can maintain cellular architecture at the nanometer level. Yet even perfect structural preservation raises questions about whether static tissue could ever be reactivated, or whether the dynamic aspects of neural function would be permanently lost. The timing of brain preservation presents a particularly challenging constraint. Neural connections begin degrading within minutes of biological death, creating a narrow window during which preservation procedures must be initiated. This temporal requirement has led some researchers to explore preservation protocols that could be applied to living individuals, raising profound ethical questions about the boundary between preservation and euthanasia. Advanced scanning technologies represent the other critical component needed for mind uploading, complementing preservation techniques by providing the means to extract information from preserved neural tissue. Current electron microscopy techniques can resolve individual synapses but require brain tissue to be sectioned into thousands of ultra-thin slices, each of which must be individually imaged and computationally reconstructed into three-dimensional neural networks. The data management challenges associated with whole brain scanning are staggering. A complete human connectomy dataset would likely exceed an exabyte of information, requiring storage and processing capabilities that push the limits of current technology. More critically, converting this raw structural data into functional neural models requires sophisticated algorithms that can infer the computational properties of neural circuits from their anatomical organization. Machine learning approaches have shown promise for accelerating this reconstruction process. Using artificial intelligence systems trained on smaller brain samples to automatically identify and classify different types of neural connections. These techniques could potentially reduce the human labor required for connectomy reconstruction from centuries to decades, though they introduce their own sources of error and uncertainty. The question of what constitutes sufficient information for consciousness reconstruction remains hotly debated among researchers. Maximalist approaches argue that preserving consciousness would require capturing molecular-level details of every neuron, including the specific proteins and signaling molecules that determine neural behavior. Minimalist perspectives suggest that preserving connectivity patterns and general neural properties might be adequate, with specific molecular details being less critical for maintaining conscious experience. This uncertainty reflects deeper questions about the relationship between brain structure and mental function. We know that the same neural network can produce different behaviors depending on its current state of activity and the modulatory influences acting upon it. Capturing these dynamic aspects of brain function might require techniques that go beyond static structural preservation to include information about neural activity patterns and biochemical states. Partial brain emulation offers a potential stepping stone toward full mind uploading, focusing on replicating specific brain functions rather than complete consciousness. Sensory processing systems have emerged as particularly attractive targets because they have well-defined inputs and measurable outputs that can be objectively evaluated. Several research groups have developed artificial retinal implants that can restore limited vision by directly stimulating retinal neurons with patterns derived from camera inputs. Motor control systems present another promising domain for partial brain emulation. Brain-computer interfaces can already decode motor intentions from neural activity recorded in motor cortex, allowing paralyzed individuals to control robotic arms or computer cursors through thought alone. These systems demonstrate that artificial devices can successfully interface with biological neural networks, at least for specific computational functions. Memory systems pose greater challenges for partial emulation because they involve distributed networks that span multiple brain regions. Episodic memories, in particular, appear to depend on coordinated activity between the hippocampus and various cortical areas, making them difficult to isolate and replicate artificially. However, some researchers have made progress in developing artificial memory systems that can enhance or replace specific aspects of biological memory function. The Hippocampal Prosthesis Project, led by researchers at the University of Southern California, has created artificial devices that can mimic the computational functions of hippocampal neural circuits. These devices can learn to predict neural activity patterns and provide appropriate stimulation to downstream brain regions when hippocampal function is impaired. Early trials in animals and humans have shown some success in restoring memory formation abilities, suggesting that artificial replacement of specific brain functions might be achievable. However, scaling these approaches to encompass the full range of cognitive functions that contribute to conscious experience remains extraordinarily challenging. Higher-level cognitive processes like reasoning, planning, and self-awareness involve complex interactions between multiple brain systems that are still poorly understood. Creating artificial replacements for these functions would require advances in both neuroscience and artificial intelligence that go far beyond current capabilities. The integration challenges become even more complex when considering how different artificial brain components would need to communicate with each other and with any remaining biological tissue. Biological neural networks use sophisticated signaling protocols that involve not just electrical activity, but also chemical messengers that modulate neural behavior across multiple timescales. Replicating these communication mechanisms in artificial systems would require unprecedented advances in bioengineering and neural interface technology. Hybrid biological artificial systems might offer a more achievable pathway toward enhanced or uploaded consciousness. Rather than replacing the entire brain with artificial components, these approaches would gradually integrate artificial elements with biological neural networks, potentially preserving biological function while adding new capabilities or extending longevity. Some researchers envision scenarios where artificial neural implants could supplement biological memory systems, providing enhanced storage capacity or improved recall abilities. Others propose artificial components that could repair damaged neural circuits, potentially reversing the effects of aging or neurodegenerative disease. These hybrid approaches might allow for gradual transition toward more artificial systems while maintaining continuity of conscious experience. The reversibility question adds another dimension to considerations of hybrid systems and mind uploading. If consciousness could be uploaded to artificial systems, would it be possible to download it back into biological brains? This possibility might provide reassurance for individuals considering mind uploading, knowing that the transition might not be permanent. However, the technical challenges of reverse uploading might be even greater than those of initial uploading, particularly if the artificial systems operate according to different principles than biological neural networks. Substrate independence represents a fundamental assumption underlying most mind uploading scenarios. This principle suggests that consciousness depends on information processing patterns rather than the specific physical materials that implement those patterns. If substrate independence is correct, then consciousness should be transferable between biological and artificial systems, provided that the artificial systems can replicate the relevant computational processes. However, some theories of consciousness challenge this assumption, suggesting that conscious experience might depend on specific physical properties of biological neural networks. Quantum theories of consciousness propose that quantum mechanical processes within neurons might be essential for conscious experience, potentially making consciousness impossible to replicate in classical computer systems. Orchestrated objective reduction, developed by physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, represents the most detailed quantum theory of consciousness. This theory suggests that consciousness arises from quantum computations within microtubules, protein structures found in all cells, including neurons. If this theory is correct, then mind uploading would require quantum computers capable of simulating these quantum mechanical processes, dramatically increasing the technical requirements for successful consciousness transfer. Critics argue that biological neural networks are too warm and noisy to support the delicate quantum states required by these theories. The brain operates at body temperature and is filled with thermal vibrations that would typically destroy quantum coherence within femtoseconds. However, some researchers have proposed mechanisms by which biological systems might protect quantum states from environmental decoherence, potentially enabling quantum computation in living neural networks. The debate over quantum theories of consciousness illustrates the fundamental uncertainty that surrounds the nature of conscious experience. Despite decades of intensive research, we still lack consensus about the basic mechanisms that give rise to consciousness, making it difficult to determine what would be required to preserve or transfer conscious experience artificially. Emergent properties represent another potential obstacle to mind uploading. Complex systems often exhibit behaviors that cannot be predicted from knowledge of their individual components, arising instead from the interactions between components at higher levels of organization. If consciousness is an emergent property of neural networks, then preserving consciousness might require replicating not just individual neurons, but also the specific patterns of interaction that give rise to conscious experience. The challenge of identifying and preserving emergent properties becomes particularly acute when considering the multiple scales at which brain organization occurs. Neural networks exhibit structure and function at the level of individual synapses, local circuits, brain regions, and global connectivity patterns. Consciousness might depend on emergent properties that arise from interactions across all these scales simultaneously, making it extraordinarily difficult to determine what aspects of brain organization are essential for conscious experience. System-level approaches to understanding consciousness have begun to address these multi-scale challenges by studying how information flows through neural networks at different levels of organization. Network neuroscience uses mathematical tools from graph theory to analyze connectivity patterns in brain networks, revealing organizational principles that might be essential for conscious function. Default mode network research has identified a specific set of brain regions that remain active during rest and appear to be involved in self-referential thinking and consciousness of self. This network includes regions in the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus, among others. Disruption of default mode network activity is associated with altered states of consciousness, suggesting that preserving this network might be essential for maintaining normal conscious experience. Global workspace dynamics represent another system-level property that might be crucial for consciousness. Research using techniques like electroencephalography and magnetoencephalography has revealed that conscious perception is associated with specific patterns of neural activity that spread across multiple brain regions within hundreds of milliseconds. These global ignition events appear to make information available to multiple cognitive systems simultaneously, creating the unified conscious experience that characterizes normal awareness. Replicating these global dynamics in artificial systems would require not just simulating individual brain regions, but also preserving the precise timing relationships that coordinate activity across the entire brain. This temporal coordination depends on the physical properties of neural connections, including the speed at which signals travel along different pathways and the delays introduced by synaptic transmission. The speed of artificial neural networks presents both opportunities and challenges for mind uploading. Electronic circuits can operate millions of times faster than biological neurons, potentially enabling uploaded minds to think and experience subjective time at accelerated rates. This could allow uploaded consciousness to experience centuries of subjective time within days or hours of real time, dramatically expanding the possibilities for experience and accomplishment. However, this speed advantage might also create integration challenges if uploaded minds need to interact with biological humans or physical reality. Communication and coordination between fast artificial minds and slow biological systems might become increasingly difficult, potentially leading to a divergence between uploaded and biological consciousness that undermines social cohesion and shared human experience. Distributed consciousness represents another possibility enabled by artificial substrates. Unlike biological brains, which are confined to single physical locations, artificial neural networks could potentially be distributed across multiple computing systems, possibly spanning global distances. This might enable forms of consciousness that exist simultaneously in multiple locations or that can dynamically redistribute their computational load based on available resources. The implications of distributed consciousness extend beyond technical considerations to fundamental questions about personal identity and individual existence. If consciousness could be distributed across multiple systems, would it still make sense to think of individual minds as discrete entities? Would distributed consciousness represent a form of collective intelligence that transcends traditional notions of individual identity? These possibilities highlight how mind uploading might not simply preserve existing forms of human consciousness, but could enable entirely new modes of conscious experience. The uploaded minds of the future might be as different from current human consciousness as human consciousness is from the simple nervous systems of early animals. This transformation might represent the next major phase in the evolution of consciousness itself. Backup and restoration capabilities represent one of the most appealing aspects of digital consciousness for many mind uploading enthusiasts. Unlike biological consciousness, which is vulnerable to permanent destruction through death or brain damage, digital consciousness could theoretically be copied and restored from backup systems. This might provide unprecedented security against the loss of conscious experience and could enable forms of practical immortality. However, the backup question raises complex philosophical issues about the relationship between original and copy. If consciousness could be restored from backup after the destruction of the original, would the restored consciousness be the same individual or a new person with identical memories? This question becomes particularly acute if multiple copies are restored simultaneously, creating scenarios where multiple individuals might have equal claims to being the original person. Version control systems, borrowed from software development, might provide frameworks for managing these identity challenges. Digital consciousness could potentially maintain branching histories that track the development of different copies over time, allowing individuals to merge or diverge their consciousness as desired. However, such systems would require unprecedented advances in both technology and social institutions to manage the legal and ethical implications of consciousness copying. The economics of digital consciousness present both opportunities and challenges for widespread adoption of mind-uploading technology. Digital minds might require substantial computational resources to maintain, creating ongoing costs that could limit access to uploaded existence. However, digital consciousness might also be able to generate economic value through accelerated thinking and enhanced cognitive abilities, potentially offsetting these maintenance costs. Labour markets could be fundamentally transformed by the availability of digital consciousness that can think faster than biological humans and potentially be copied to meet demand. This might create unprecedented productivity gains, but could also render biological human labour obsolete in many domains, creating significant social and economic disruption. The energy requirements for supporting large populations of uploaded minds could be enormous, potentially exceeding current global energy production if digital consciousness proves computationally expensive. This might create pressure to develop more efficient forms of artificial consciousness or to limit the number of uploaded minds that can be supported simultaneously. Governance structures for uploaded consciousness present unprecedented challenges for political and social organization. Digital minds might have capabilities and vulnerabilities that are fundamentally different from biological humans, requiring new forms of rights and protections. The ability to copy, modify, or delete digital consciousness raises questions about bodily autonomy and personal security that have no parallels in biological existence. Democratic participation might need to be reconsidered if digital minds can think much faster than biological humans, or if consciousness can be copied to create multiple voting entities. Traditional concepts of citizenship and political representation might prove inadequate for societies that include both biological and digital forms of consciousness. International coordination of mind-uploading technology development remains limited, despite the potential global implications of digital consciousness. Different countries have varying regulatory approaches to neuroscience research and human enhancement technologies, creating possibilities for regulatory arbitrage that could undermine safety standards or ethical oversight. The military implications of mind-uploading technology have received attention from defense researchers who recognize that enhanced cognitive abilities and digital consciousness could provide significant strategic advantages. However, the development of mind-uploading for military purposes raises ethical questions about the weaponization of consciousness and the potential for creating forms of digital warfare that target uploaded minds directly. As research across these multiple domains continues to advance, the scientific community finds itself grappling with questions that extend far beyond traditional disciplinary boundaries. The technical challenges of brain scanning and neural simulation intersect with philosophical puzzles about consciousness and identity, ethical dilemmas about human enhancement, and social questions about the future organization of human civilization. The convergence of these diverse considerations suggests that mind-uploading, if it becomes possible, will represent far more than a simple technological achievement. It could mark a fundamental transition in human existence, comparable to the development of language, agriculture, or civilization itself. Understanding whether and how this transition might occur requires continued research across multiple disciplines and ongoing dialogue about the kind of future we want to create for consciousness in an age of advancing technology. The experimental frameworks that might eventually enable mind-uploading operate at the intersection of multiple rapidly advancing fields, each contributing essential pieces to an extraordinarily complex puzzle. Understanding how these pieces might fit together requires examining not just individual technologies, but the intricate ways they must integrate to achieve something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. Neuromorphic computing represents one of the most promising technological pathways for implementing brain-like information processing in artificial systems. Unlike traditional digital computers that process information sequentially, neuromorphic chips attempt to replicate the parallel, distributed processing that characterizes biological neural networks. These specialized processors use analog circuits to mimic the behavior of neurons and synapses, potentially offering dramatic improvements in energy efficiency compared to conventional computers running neural simulations. Intel's Loihi chip and IBM's True North processor demonstrate early implementations of neuromorphic principles, containing thousands of artificial neurons that can learn and adapt in real time. These systems consume orders of magnitude less power than traditional computers performing similar tasks, suggesting that neuromorphic approaches might provide the energy efficiency needed to sustain large-scale brain emulations. However, current neuromorphic systems operate with simplified models of neural behavior that capture only basic aspects of biological neural computation. Scaling neuromorphic systems to handle the complexity of human brain emulation would require revolutionary advances in both chip design and manufacturing processes. Each artificial neuron would need to replicate not just the basic input-output relationships of biological neurons, but also their complex temporal dynamics, learning mechanisms, and neuromodulatory responses. Achieving this level of biological fidelity while maintaining the advantages of electronic systems presents engineering challenges that push the boundaries of current semiconductor technology. The integration of neuromorphic hardware with advanced brain imaging creates possibilities for hybrid scanning and emulation systems that could bridge the gap between biological and artificial neural networks. Real-time brain-computer interfaces using neuromorphic processors have demonstrated the ability to decode neural signals and translate them into control commands for external devices. These systems suggest potential pathways for gradually replacing biological neural circuits with artificial ones while maintaining functional connectivity. Optogenetics has emerged as a revolutionary tool for understanding and potentially manipulating neural circuits with unprecedented precision. This technique involves introducing light-sensitive proteins into neurons, allowing researchers to control neural activity with precise temporal and spatial resolution using laser light. Optogenetic methods have enabled detailed mapping of neural circuits in animal models, revealing how specific patterns of neural activity give rise to behaviors and experiences. The therapeutic applications of optogenetics demonstrate its potential for interfacing with human neural systems. Clinical trials are underway for optogenetic treatments of blindness, where light-sensitive proteins introduced into retinal cells could restore vision by directly stimulating neural pathways that process visual information. Success in these applications might pave the way for more extensive optogenetic modifications that could facilitate brain-machine integration. However, applying optogenetics to human brain systems faces significant biological and ethical barriers. Introducing genetic modifications into human neural tissue raises safety concerns about long-term effects and potential immune responses. The precision required for optogenetic control of complex neural networks far exceeds current capabilities, particularly for the distributed circuits that appear to underlie consciousness and higher cognitive functions. Advanced brain organoids represent another frontier in consciousness research that might provide crucial insights into the minimal requirements for conscious experience. These laboratory-grown neural tissues, derived from human stem cells, can develop complex three-dimensional structures that exhibit many characteristics of biological brain tissue. Some organoids spontaneously generate rhythmic electrical activity patterns that resemble those observed in developing human brains. Recent experiments with brain organoids have demonstrated their capacity for learning and memory formation, suggesting that these artificial neural tissues might possess rudimentary forms of information processing capability. Researchers have successfully interfaced organoids with robotic systems, allowing the biological neural networks to control simple behaviors through learning and adaptation. These achievements raise profound questions about the potential consciousness of organoids and the ethical implications of experimenting with potentially sentient artificial neural tissues. The Organoid Research Program offers a unique window into the relationship between neural complexity and conscious experience. By systematically varying the size, structure, and connectivity of organoids, researchers might identify critical thresholds for the emergence of consciousness-like properties. Such insights could inform the design of artificial neural systems and help determine what levels of complexity might be necessary for successful mind uploading. Brain-in-a-dish experiments push these concepts even further by attempting to sustain complete brain structures outside of living organisms. Advanced life support systems can maintain isolated brain tissue for extended periods, preserving neural activity and connectivity while providing controlled experimental access to neural circuits. These techniques have been successfully applied to maintain rodent brain slices for weeks, allowing detailed study of neural network dynamics in isolation from the rest of the body. The prospect of sustaining human brain tissue outside the body raises extraordinary possibilities for consciousness research and potentially for mind preservation. If human brain tissue could be maintained artificially while retaining its essential functional properties, this might provide a stepping stone toward more complete forms of biological consciousness preservation. However, the technical requirements for maintaining complex brain tissue indefinitely remain far beyond current capabilities. Ethical frameworks for brain-in-a-dish research struggle with unprecedented questions about the moral status of isolated neural tissues. If sustained brain tissue retains the capacity for conscious experience, researchers might inadvertently create forms of consciousness that experience suffering or distress without any means of communication or relief. These concerns have led to calls for careful, ethical oversight of advanced brain tissue research and development of protocols for assessing potential consciousness in artificial neural systems. The convergence of these various research streams creates possibilities for hybrid approaches to mind uploading that combine multiple technologies in complementary ways. Brain organoids might serve as biological computing elements within largely artificial neural networks, providing essential biological functions while benefiting from the speed and flexibility of electronic systems. Optogenetic interfaces could enable precise communication between biological and artificial neural components, creating seamless integration between different types of neural substrates. Quantum computing introduces another dimension to considerations of consciousness and mind uploading. If consciousness depends on quantum mechanical processes within biological neural networks, then successful mind uploading might require quantum computational substrates capable of supporting the delicate quantum states that give rise to conscious experience. Current quantum computers operate under highly controlled conditions at temperatures near absolute zero, making them unsuitable for sustaining biological-type consciousness. However, the field of quantum biology has revealed that biological systems can indeed harness quantum mechanical effects for computational purposes, despite operating in warm, noisy environments. Photosynthesis, bird navigation, and potentially neural processes in the brain all appear to exploit quantum coherence to achieve computational advantages that would be impossible with purely classical mechanisms. Understanding how biological systems protect and utilize quantum states might inform the design of quantum neural networks capable of supporting consciousness. Room temperature quantum computers represent a holy grail for quantum technology that could dramatically expand the possibilities for quantum-based mind uploading. Several research groups are pursuing approaches that might enable quantum computation in biological-type environments, including topological quantum computers that use exotic states of matter to protect quantum information from environmental decoherence. Success in these efforts might open entirely new pathways for replicating the quantum aspects of biological consciousness in artificial systems. The question of consciousness detection becomes increasingly urgent as artificial neural systems become more sophisticated. We currently have no reliable method for determining whether artificial systems possess genuine conscious experience or merely simulate conscious-like behaviors. This detection problem has profound implications for mind uploading research because we cannot verify whether uploaded minds have successfully preserved consciousness or have created unconscious simulations. Consciousness detection protocols under development attempt to identify objective signatures of conscious experience that could be measured in both biological and artificial systems. Integrated information theory provides mathematical frameworks for quantifying consciousness based on information integration patterns, potentially offering objective measures that could be applied to artificial neural networks. However, these measures remain controversial and have not been validated against subjective reports of conscious experience. Behavioral tests for consciousness face the fundamental limitation that consciousness is a subjective, first-person experience that cannot be directly observed from the outside. Even sophisticated artificial systems that pass elaborate consciousness tests might lack genuine subjective experience, creating what philosophers call the problem of philosophical zombies. This uncertainty means that determining the success of mind uploading attempts might remain fundamentally ambiguous. The development of consciousness meters that could objectively assess the presence and quality of conscious experience represents a crucial milestone for mind uploading research. Such devices would need to measure neural activity patterns associated with consciousness while distinguishing genuine awareness from unconscious information processing. Several research groups are working toward this goal, using advanced brain imaging techniques to identify the neural signatures of conscious perception. Anesthesia research has provided valuable insights into the neural basis of consciousness by studying how anesthetic agents disrupt conscious experience while leaving many brain functions intact. These studies reveal that consciousness appears to depend on specific patterns of neural connectivity and communication that can be selectively disrupted without eliminating all neural activity. Understanding these patterns might inform the design of artificial neural systems and help identify the minimal requirements for conscious experience. The reversibility of anesthesia demonstrates that consciousness can be temporarily suspended and restored without permanent loss of identity or continuity. This suggests that consciousness might be more robust than commonly assumed, potentially surviving various forms of disruption or transfer. However, anesthesia operates within biological neural networks that maintain their basic structure throughout the process, whereas mind uploading would involve much more radical transformations of the neural substrate. Gradual replacement scenarios attempt to address continuity concerns by implementing mind uploading through incremental substitution of biological neural components with artificial ones. This approach, inspired by the philosophical thought experiment of the ship of Theseus, would theoretically preserve continuity of consciousness by maintaining uninterrupted neural activity throughout the replacement process. Implementing gradual replacement faces enormous technical challenges related to creating artificial neural components that can seamlessly integrate with biological neural networks. Each replacement component would need to process information in ways that are precisely compatible with the biological systems it interfaces with, requiring unprecedented understanding of neural communication protocols and computational principles. The timeline for gradual replacement could span years or decades, allowing for careful monitoring and adjustment of artificial neural components as they integrate with biological systems. This extended timeline might provide opportunities to address problems that arise during the replacement process and to verify that consciousness remains intact throughout the transition. However, the extended nature of gradual replacement also creates risks that accumulated changes might gradually alter consciousness in unintended ways. Parallel processing approaches to mind uploading might create multiple copies of consciousness that could be compared and validated against each other. If several independent uploading processes produce similar results, this might provide evidence that the essential features of consciousness have been successfully preserved. However, creating multiple copies also raises complex questions about personal identity and the rights of copied consciousness. The branching identity problem becomes particularly acute in scenarios where multiple copies of uploaded consciousness develop independently over time. Each copy would have legitimate claims to being the continuation of the original person, yet they would gradually diverge as they accumulate different experiences and potentially make different choices. Traditional concepts of personal identity provide no clear framework for resolving these situations. Legal frameworks for uploaded consciousness remain largely undeveloped, despite the potential need for new forms of rights and protections that account for the unique properties of digital minds. Uploaded consciousness might require protections against unauthorized copying, modification, or deletion that have no parallels in current law. The ability to exist in multiple copies simultaneously could complicate traditional concepts of individual rights and legal responsibility. Property rights present particularly complex challenges for uploaded consciousness. Would uploaded minds own their own computational substrate, or would they be dependent on external systems for their continued existence? The relationship between consciousness and the physical systems that sustain it might need to be reconceptualized to accommodate forms of existence that can be copied, transferred, or distributed across multiple locations. Inheritance and estate planning could become extraordinarily complex if consciousness could persist indefinitely through uploading. Traditional inheritance assumes that individuals eventually die and transfer their assets to heirs, but uploaded consciousness might persist for centuries or millennia. This could lead to unprecedented concentrations of wealth and power in the hands of uploaded individuals who never face the biological imperative of death. Social stratification might emerge between uploaded and biological humans, creating new forms of inequality based on the type of consciousness rather than traditional markers like wealth or education. Uploaded minds might possess cognitive advantages that make them superior to biological humans in many domains, potentially leading to the marginalization of biological consciousness in important decision-making processes. The psychological adaptation required for existence as uploaded consciousness presents challenges that extend far beyond technical considerations. Human psychology evolved for embodied existence in physical environments, and the transition to digital consciousness might require fundamental changes in how uploaded minds relate to themselves and their environment. The absence of biological drives, physical sensations, and embodied interactions could profoundly alter the character of conscious experience. Identity formation in uploaded consciousness might follow entirely different patterns than those observed in biological development. Without the constraints of physical aging and biological death, uploaded minds might have opportunities for psychological growth and transformation that extend far beyond current human experience. However, the absence of familiar developmental markers might also create challenges for maintaining psychological coherence and sense of purpose. Social relationships between uploaded and biological consciousness could become increasingly strained as the two forms of existence diverge in their capabilities and experiences. Communication barriers might emerge as uploaded minds think faster or differently than biological humans, potentially leading to the formation of separate communities organized around different types of consciousness. The potential for consciousness enhancement through uploading opens possibilities that extend far beyond simple preservation of existing mental capabilities. Digital consciousness might enable forms of memory enhancement, processing speed increases, and new sensory capabilities that are impossible in biological systems. These enhancements might represent the next phase in the evolution of consciousness itself. However, enhancement also raises questions about the preservation of human nature and values. Would extensively enhanced consciousness still be recognizably human, or would it represent a new form of existence that transcends traditional human categories? The answer might depend on which aspects of consciousness are enhanced and how these changes interact with the core features that define personal identity. Collective consciousness represents another possibility enabled by digital substrates that could fundamentally transform the nature of individual existence. If uploaded minds could share information directly or merge their processing capabilities, this might enable forms of collective intelligence that surpass anything possible with individual consciousness. However, collective consciousness might also threaten individual autonomy and personal identity in ways that many people would find unacceptable. The exploration of these possibilities requires continued research across multiple disciplines, from neuroscience and computer science to philosophy and ethics. As our understanding of consciousness advances and our technological capabilities expand, we move closer to determining whether the ancient human dream of transcending biological limitations might actually be achievable through the upload of minds to digital substrates. The questions surrounding mind uploading force us to confront fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and what it means to be human in an age of advancing technology. Whether these questions will eventually be answered through successful demonstration of mind uploading or through the discovery of insurmountable barriers remains one of the most profound uncertainties facing our species as we venture into an uncertain technological future. Yet the very pursuit of these answers continues to deepen our understanding of consciousness itself, revealing new insights into the nature of the mind that have value regardless of whether complete mind uploading proves possible. Each advance in brain imaging, neural simulation, and consciousness research brings us closer to understanding the deepest mysteries of human existence, even as it raises new questions about the future of consciousness in an increasingly artificial world. The journey toward possible mind uploading represents more than just a technological quest. It embodies humanity's eternal struggle to understand itself and to transcend the limitations that define our current existence. Whether this struggle ultimately leads to the preservation of consciousness beyond biological death or to a deeper appreciation of the irreplaceable value of biological existence, it promises to reshape our understanding of what it means to be conscious beings in a universe that gave rise to minds capable of contemplating their own nature. The timeline for achieving mind uploading remains one of the most contentious aspects of this entire field, with predictions ranging from wildly optimistic to deeply pessimistic, depending on which experts you consult. Ray Kurzweil, the renowned futurist, has famously predicted that mind uploading could become reality by 2045, just over 2 decades from now. This timeline assumes continued exponential growth in computing power and revolutionary breakthroughs in neuroscience occurring at an unprecedented pace. More conservative researchers paint a very different picture. Many neuroscientists suggest that even basic whole brain emulation might not be achievable for 60 years or more, with true mind uploading extending even further into the future. These estimates reflect the sobering reality of how much we still don't understand about the brain and consciousness itself. Recent scientific projections attempt to ground these predictions in measurable technological trends. Based on current rates of progress in computing power and brain imaging capabilities, researchers estimate that mouse whole brain simulation might be possible around 2034, followed by primate brain simulation around 2044. Human brain emulation would likely come later, possibly decades after we achieve success with simpler mammalian brains. Yet even these carefully calculated timelines rest on assumptions that might prove overly optimistic. They assume that Moore's law will continue driving exponential improvements in computing performance, despite growing evidence that this trend is slowing as transistors approach atomic scales. They also assume that our understanding of brain function will advance at rates comparable to our technological capabilities, which may prove unrealistic given the complexity of neural systems. The computational requirements alone present staggering challenges. Conservative estimates suggest that simulating a human brain would require processing power equivalent to at least 1 quintillion operations per second, sustained continuously. While current supercomputers can achieve such performance levels, they consume enormous amounts of energy and occupy entire buildings. Creating the kind of efficient, portable computing systems that would be practical for mind uploading would require revolutionary advances in processor design and energy efficiency. Neuromorphic computing offers one potential pathway toward achieving these computational goals. These specialized processors attempt to replicate the parallel, distributed processing characteristics of biological neural networks, potentially offering dramatic improvements in energy efficiency compared to traditional computers running brain simulations. Early neuromorphic systems, like Intel's Loihi chip, demonstrate promising capabilities, but they currently operate with highly simplified models of neural behavior that capture only basic aspects of biological computation. The brain mapping challenge presents equally daunting obstacles. Current connector mapping efforts can trace neural connections in tiny volumes of brain tissue, but scaling these techniques to map entire human brains would require technological advances that might take decades to achieve. The human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons connected by approximately 100 trillion synapses, creating networks of almost incomprehensible complexity. Even if we could map every connection in a human brain, we would still face the challenge of understanding how static connectivity patterns give rise to the dynamic processes of thought and consciousness. The brain operates as a constantly changing system where connection strengths vary based on experience and activity. Capturing these dynamic aspects might require entirely new approaches to brain imaging that can monitor neural activity patterns across multiple timescales simultaneously. The question of what level of detail would be necessary for successful mind uploading remains hotly debated. Some researchers argue that preserving connectivity patterns at the synaptic level would be sufficient to maintain the essential information structures that give rise to consciousness. Others contend that molecular-level details, including specific proteins and signaling molecules, might be crucial for preserving the subtle dynamics of neural communication. This uncertainty reflects our incomplete understanding of how information is actually stored and processed in biological neural networks. We know that memories and learnt behaviors can persist for decades, despite the constant turnover of molecules within neurons. This suggests that information storage in the brain might be more robust than molecular-level details would suggest. However, we also know that subtle changes in neural chemistry can dramatically alter behavior and conscious experience, indicating that some molecular details might indeed be essential. The preservation problem adds another layer of complexity to mind uploading scenarios. Unlike other forms of information that can be copied without degradation, brain information exists in living tissue that begins deteriorating within minutes of biological death. This creates a narrow window during which any brain scanning procedure would need to be completed, assuming we want to preserve the patterns of neural activity that might be essential for consciousness. Advanced preservation techniques attempt to address this challenge by using chemical solutions to fix brain tissue in stable states that could theoretically maintain cellular structure for extended periods. However, these preservation methods face their own limitations. The process of chemical fixation might alter neural structures in ways that compromise the very information we're trying to preserve. Moreover, preserved tissue lacks the dynamic activity patterns that might be essential for consciousness, raising questions about whether static preservation could ever provide adequate information for mind reconstruction. The identity problem represents perhaps the most philosophically challenging aspect of mind uploading. Even if we could create a perfect digital copy of someone's brain, fundamental questions would remain about whether this copy would truly be the same person or merely an identical replica with the same memories and personality traits. Traditional theories of personal identity struggle with the possibilities created by mind uploading technology. The psychological continuity theory suggests that personal identity depends on maintaining chains of memory and mental connection across time. According to this view, you remain the same person as long as your current mental states connect appropriately to your past mental states through memory and psychological development. Mind uploading creates scenarios that challenge this framework. If we could create multiple identical copies of someone's mind, which one would be the real person? Each copy would have identical memories and personality traits, yet they would be distinct entities existing in separate locations. This creates what philosophers call the branching problem, where traditional concepts of unique personal identity break down. Some philosophers have proposed that identity can branch, allowing multiple copies to each maintain legitimate claims to being continuations of the original person. This branching view of identity challenges our intuitive understanding of personal uniqueness, but might be necessary to accommodate the realities of digital consciousness. However, accepting branching identity raises profound questions about legal responsibility, inheritance rights, and the nature of individual existence. The stream of consciousness problem presents another dimension of the identity challenge. Our sense of being continuous conscious beings depends partly on the unbroken flow of awareness from moment to moment. This stream appears to pause during sleep, yet we maintain our sense of identity upon waking because the gap in consciousness is temporary, and our brain structure remains intact throughout the process. Mind uploading scenarios might involve much more radical discontinuities in conscious experience. Instantaneous copying would create a temporal gap between the scanning of the biological brain and the activation of the digital copy. Critics argue that this gap represents a fundamental break in the stream of consciousness, resulting in the death of the original consciousness and the creation of a new entity that merely believes it is the continuation of the original person. Gradual replacement methods attempt to address continuity concerns by implementing mind uploading through incremental substitution of biological neural components with artificial ones. This approach would theoretically preserve the stream of consciousness by maintaining uninterrupted neural activity throughout the replacement process. However, implementing gradual replacement faces enormous technical challenges related to creating artificial neural components that can seamlessly integrate with biological systems. The philosophical zombie problem adds yet another layer of uncertainty to discussions of digital consciousness. Even a perfect simulation of a brain might lack genuine subjective experience, creating what philosophers call a zombie, a system that exhibits all the behaviors associated with consciousness, while lacking any inner experience. This possibility means that successful mind uploading might be fundamentally unverifiable from external observation. We currently have no reliable method for determining whether artificial systems possess genuine conscious experience or merely simulate conscious-like behaviors. This detection problem has profound implications for mind uploading because we might never be able to confirm whether uploaded minds have successfully preserved consciousness or have created unconscious simulations that merely believe they are conscious. The ethical implications of mind uploading extend far beyond questions of technical feasibility. The prospect of digital immortality raises profound concerns about fairness, resource allocation, and the nature of human society. If mind uploading becomes possible, it would likely be extraordinarily expensive initially, potentially creating scenarios where only wealthy individuals could afford digital immortality. This economic barrier could establish permanent class divisions between uploaded elites who possess unlimited lifespans and enhanced cognitive abilities, and biological masses who remain subject to aging and death. Such inequality might be more extreme than any form of social stratification in human history, creating essentially different species of conscious beings with vastly different capabilities and life prospects. The social integration of uploaded consciousness presents challenges that extend beyond economic considerations. How would digital minds participate in human society? Would they have voting rights comparable to biological citizens? Could they own property, enter contracts, or form legal relationships? These questions suggest that successful mind uploading would require not just technological breakthroughs, but fundamental restructuring of legal and social institutions. Environmental concerns also loom large in considerations of widespread mind uploading. Digital consciousness would require substantial computational resources, potentially consuming enormous amounts of energy. Supporting billions of uploaded minds might require energy production that dwarfs current global consumption, creating significant environmental challenges unless accompanied by revolutionary advances in energy efficiency or renewable energy sources. The potential for consciousness enhancement through digital uploading opens possibilities that extend far beyond simple preservation of existing mental capabilities. Digital minds might possess perfect memory, accelerated thinking speeds, and the ability to interface directly with vast information networks. These enhancements could enable forms of intellectual achievement and creative expression that are impossible within biological constraints. However, extensive enhancement raises questions about the preservation of human nature and values. Would heavily enhanced consciousness still be recognizably human, or would it represent a new form of existence that transcends traditional human categories? The answer might depend on which aspects of consciousness are enhanced and how these changes interact with the core psychological features that define personal identity. Religious and spiritual perspectives add another dimension to the ethical landscape surrounding mind uploading. Many religious traditions hold beliefs about souls, afterlives, and the sacred nature of biological existence that conflict with materialistic assumptions underlying mind uploading technology. These perspectives raise questions about whether digital copying could preserve whatever spiritual essence makes consciousness unique and valuable. The consent and autonomy issues surrounding mind uploading present particularly complex challenges. Unlike other medical procedures, mind uploading would fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. Providing informed consent for such a radical transformation seems nearly impossible, given our limited understanding of what digital consciousness might actually entail. Moreover, the irreversible nature of many mind-uploading scenarios means that individuals might be committing to forms of existence they cannot adequately evaluate beforehand. The psychological adaptation required for digital consciousness might be so profound that uploaded individuals would essentially become different people, raising questions about whether their pre-upload selves could meaningfully consent to such transformation. The governance of mind-uploading technology presents unprecedented challenges for democratic societies. The development of consciousness transfer capabilities would affect fundamental aspects of human existence. Yet the technical complexity makes meaningful public participation in policy decisions extremely difficult. How can democratic institutions make informed choices about technologies that their constituents cannot fully understand? International coordination of mind-uploading research remains limited despite the potential global implications of digital consciousness technology. Different countries have varying regulatory frameworks for neuroscience research and different cultural attitudes toward human enhancement, creating possibilities for regulatory arbitrage that could undermine safety standards or ethical oversight. The military implications of mind uploading have begun attracting attention from the defense researchers who recognize that enhanced cognitive abilities could provide significant strategic advantages. However, the weaponization of consciousness technology raises ethical concerns about the creation of enhanced soldiers or the development of digital warfare capabilities that target uploaded minds directly. As research continues across these multiple dimensions, the scientific community finds itself grappling with questions that challenge fundamental assumptions about consciousness, identity, and human nature. The technical hurdles are immense, the philosophical puzzles are profound, and the ethical implications are staggering. Yet the potential rewards, if mind uploading proves possible, could transform human existence in ways that dwarf any previous technological revolution. The question of whether humans will ever upload their minds remains genuinely open. The optimists point to exponential trends in computing power and rapid advances in neuroscience, suggesting that technological solutions to consciousness transfer might emerge sooner than skeptics expect. The pessimists highlight the enormous gaps in our understanding of consciousness and the unprecedented technical challenges involved in brain emulation, arguing that mind uploading might remain forever beyond human capabilities. Perhaps the most honest assessment is that we simply don't know whether mind uploading will prove possible. The challenges are so novel and the required advances so revolutionary that confident predictions seem premature. We are venturing into territory where our current scientific understanding provides only limited guidance, where philosophical puzzles intersect with engineering problems in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. What seems certain is that the pursuit of mind uploading will continue driving advances in neuroscience, computer science, and philosophy, regardless of whether complete consciousness transfer proves achievable. Each attempt to understand and replicate the mechanisms of consciousness deepens our knowledge of the mind itself, revealing insights that have value independent of their applications to uploading technology. The journey toward possible mind uploading represents more than just a technological quest. It embodies humanity's eternal desire to transcend biological limitations and achieve forms of existence that extend beyond our current constraints. Whether this desire will ultimately be fulfilled through successful consciousness transfer or will lead us to a deeper appreciation of biological consciousness remains one of the most profound questions facing our species. In the end, the question of mind uploading forces us to confront what we value most about conscious existence. Is consciousness primarily about information processing patterns that could theoretically be replicated in artificial systems? Or does it depend on the specific biological substrate that evolution has refined over millions of years? The answer will determine not just the feasibility of mind uploading, but our understanding of what it truly means to be conscious beings in a universe that somehow gave rise to minds capable of contemplating their own nature. As we stand at this crossroads between biological and potentially digital consciousness, we face choices that will shape the future of awareness itself. The next few decades will likely provide crucial insights into whether the ancient human dream of transcending mortality through technology represents a genuine possibility or a beautiful impossibility that nonetheless enriches our understanding of the consciousness we already possess. The mystery deepens when we examine what current neuroscience actually tells us about the possibility of digital consciousness transfer. Recent breakthroughs in brain imaging have revealed that consciousness operates through mechanisms far more complex than early researchers imagined. Advanced functional magnetic resonance imaging can now track blood flow changes in the brain with millimeter precision, showing us which neural networks activate during different types of conscious experience. Yet these sophisticated imaging techniques reveal a troubling gap between what we can observe and what we need to understand. When you experience the taste of chocolate or feel the warmth of sunlight on your skin, specific patterns of neural activity light up across multiple brain regions simultaneously. But the imaging shows us only the shadows of consciousness, not consciousness itself. The binding problem illustrates this challenge perfectly. Your brain processes different aspects of experience in separate locations. Visual information about color gets processed in one area, motion detection happens elsewhere, while emotional responses emerge from completely different neural circuits. Somehow, these distributed processes weave together into your unified conscious experience of the world. We can watch this binding occur in real time through brain scans, but we cannot explain how separate neural events become unified, subjective experience. This gap becomes critical when considering mind uploading because it suggests that consciousness might depend on processes we cannot yet measure or understand. The temporal dynamics of neural activity present equally mysterious challenges. Consciousness unfolds continuously through time, with each moment building upon the last in ways that create what neuroscientists call the specious present, that brief window that feels like now. Brain imaging reveals that maintaining this temporal continuity requires exquisite coordination between neural networks distributed across the entire brain. Gamma waves oscillating at frequencies between 30 and 100 Hz appear to synchronize activity across vast neural distances, binding together the distributed processing that underlies conscious experience. These oscillations operate with timing precision measured in milliseconds, creating temporal windows during which information can be integrated into unified conscious moments. The connectomy mapping projects that have emerged over the past decade represent humanity's most ambitious attempt to chart the complete wiring diagram of the human brain. These efforts aim to identify every neural connection, mapping the intricate pathways through which information flows during conscious experience. The scale of this undertaking staggers the imagination. Current connectome mapping relies on electron microscopy techniques that can resolve individual synapses, the connection points between neurons, but the process requires slicing brain tissue into thousands of ultra-thin sections, each one photographed at nanometer resolution. The largest complete connectome achieved so far covers a cubic millimeter of mouse brain tissue, containing roughly 100,000 neurons and 1 billion synapses. Reconstructing this tiny volume required over a year of continuous imaging and generated more than 100 terabytes of data. Scaling these techniques to map a complete human brain would require processing power and storage capacity that pushes the boundaries of current technology. The human connectome would likely generate exabytes of information, more data than currently exists in all the world's libraries combined. Processing this information into usable maps of neural connectivity would require computational resources equivalent to the world's largest supercomputing centers operating continuously for decades. Yet even perfect connectome maps might not provide sufficient information for mind uploading. The brain operates as a dynamic system where connection strengths vary continuously based on experience and activity. Synaptic plasticity means that the patterns of connectivity in your brain change subtly with every thought, every memory, every moment of conscious experience. Static connectome maps capture only a single snapshot of these ever-changing networks. The challenge becomes even more complex when we consider that consciousness might depend on information stored not just in synaptic connections, but in the molecular machinery within individual neurons. Each neuron contains thousands of different proteins, countless signaling molecules, and intricate genetic regulatory networks that influence how it processes information. Whether these molecular details are essential for consciousness or merely implementation details remains hotly debated among researchers. Whole brain emulation represents the most comprehensive approach currently under scientific consideration for achieving mind uploading. This technique would involve scanning a brain in sufficient detail to create a complete computational model capable of reproducing all the neural processes that give rise to conscious experience. The computational requirements for such emulation challenge our current understanding of what might be technologically feasible. Conservative estimates suggest that simulating human brain activity would require processing power equivalent to at least 1 quintillion operations per second, sustained continuously. Current supercomputers can achieve such performance levels, but they consume enormous amounts of energy and occupy entire buildings. The human brain, by contrast, operates on roughly 20 watts of power, about the same as a dim light bulb. Creating artificial neural systems with comparable efficiency would require revolutionary advances in computing architecture. Neuromorphic computing offers one potential pathway toward achieving these efficiency goals. These specialized processors attempt to replicate the parallel, distributed processing characteristics of biological neural networks using analog circuits that mimic the behavior of neurons and synapses. Early neuromorphic systems demonstrate impressive energy efficiency for specific tasks, but they currently operate with highly simplified models that capture only basic aspects of neural computation. The Blue Brain project and its successor initiatives have demonstrated that detailed neural simulations can reproduce some aspects of biological brain activity. These projects have created computer models of small brain regions that exhibit realistic patterns of electrical activity and can respond to simulated sensory inputs in biologically plausible ways. However, even the most sophisticated current simulations operate at scales millions of times smaller than complete human brains. Scaling from these proof-of-concept demonstrations to full brain emulation faces challenges that extend beyond mere computational power. We lack complete understanding of how different brain regions communicate with each other and how these communications give rise to unified conscious experience. The brain operates through complex feedback loops, where activity in one region influences processing in distant areas, creating emergent behaviors that cannot be predicted from understanding individual components in isolation. The question of whether successful brain emulation would actually be conscious introduces profound philosophical uncertainties into mind-uploading scenarios. The computational theory of mind suggests that consciousness depends on information processing patterns rather than specific biological materials, implying that sufficiently detailed brain simulations should indeed be conscious. However, this remains an untested hypothesis that cannot be verified through external observation. The philosophical zombie problem illustrates the fundamental uncertainty surrounding digital consciousness. Even a perfect brain simulation might lack genuine subjective experience while exhibiting all the external behaviors associated with consciousness. This possibility means that mind-uploading success might be inherently unverifiable. An uploaded mind might claim to be conscious and exhibit all the responses we associate with awareness, yet lack any genuine inner experience. The identity problem presents equally challenging philosophical puzzles. Traditional concepts of personal identity assume that each individual is unique and cannot be duplicated. Mind-uploading scenarios force us to reconsider these fundamental assumptions about the nature of personal continuity and individual existence. The psychological continuity theory suggests that personal identity depends on maintaining appropriate connections between current and past mental states through memory and psychological development. According to this framework, you remain the same person as long as your current thoughts and experiences connect meaningfully to your personal history. Mind-uploading scenarios that preserve memories and personality traits might therefore preserve personal identity. However, digital copying creates scenarios that challenge this framework. If multiple identical copies of someone's mind could be created, which one would be the real person? Each copy would possess identical memories and personality traits, yet they would be distinct entities existing in separate computational environments. This branching problem suggests that traditional concepts of unique personal identity might be inadequate for understanding digital consciousness. Some philosophers have proposed that identity can branch, allowing multiple copies to each maintain legitimate claims to being continuations of the original person. This perspective challenges our intuitive understanding of personal uniqueness, but might be necessary to accommodate the realities of copyable consciousness. However, accepting branching identity raises profound questions about legal responsibility, inheritance rights, and the fundamental nature of individual existence. The stream of consciousness problem adds another dimension to identity considerations. Our sense of continuous existence depends partly on the unbroken flow of awareness from moment to moment. This stream appears to pause during sleep and anesthesia, yet we maintain our identity upon regaining consciousness because these interruptions are temporary and our brain structure remains intact throughout. Mind uploading might involve more radical discontinuities in conscious experience. Instantaneous copying would create temporal gaps between brain scanning and digital activation that critics argue represent fundamental breaks in the stream of consciousness. From this perspective, uploading would result in the death of the original consciousness and the creation of a new entity that merely believes it continues the original person's existence. Gradual replacement scenarios attempt to address these continuity concerns by implementing mind uploading through incremental substitution of biological neural components with artificial ones. This ship of Theseus approach would theoretically maintain uninterrupted neural activity throughout the transition process, preserving the stream of consciousness even as its physical substrate transforms from biological to digital. Yet implementing gradual replacement faces extraordinary technical challenges. Each artificial neural component would need to process information in ways precisely compatible with the biological systems it interfaces with, requiring understanding of neural communication protocols that currently exceeds our knowledge. The replacement process might need to span years or decades to ensure proper integration, creating extended periods of hybrid biological-digital existence. The reversibility question adds another layer of complexity to mind uploading considerations. If consciousness could be uploaded to digital systems, would it be possible to download it back into biological brains? This possibility might provide psychological comfort for individuals considering uploading, knowing that the transition might not be permanent. However, reverse uploading might face even greater technical challenges than initial consciousness transfer. Recent advances in brain organoid research have begun to illuminate some requirements for supporting consciousness in artificial systems. These laboratory-grown neural tissues, derived from human stem cells, can develop complex three-dimensional structures that exhibit many characteristics of biological brain tissue. Some organoids spontaneously generate rhythmic electrical activity patterns resembling those observed in developing human brains. Experiments have demonstrated that brain organoids can exhibit learning behaviors and form memories, suggesting that these artificial neural tissues possess rudimentary information processing capabilities. Researchers have successfully interfaced organoids with robotic systems, allowing biological neural networks to control simple behaviors through learning and adaptation. These achievements raise intriguing questions about the minimal requirements for conscious experience and the potential consciousness of artificial neural systems. However, current organoids remain far simpler than complete brains and lack many features that might be essential for full consciousness. They typically contain fewer than 1 million neurons, roughly equivalent to insect nervous systems, and lack the complex anatomical organization that characterizes mature human brains. Scaling organoid technology to support human-level consciousness would require advances that might take decades to achieve. The ethical implications of mind uploading extend far beyond technical feasibility questions. The prospect of digital immortality raises profound concerns about social justice, resource allocation, and the fundamental nature of human existence. If consciousness transfer becomes possible, it would likely be extraordinarily expensive initially, potentially creating permanent divisions between uploaded elites and mortal biological populations. Such inequality might be more extreme than any form of social stratification in human history. Uploaded individuals could possess unlimited lifespans, enhanced cognitive abilities, and access to information processing capabilities that far exceed biological human potential. They might become essentially different species of conscious beings with vastly superior capabilities and life prospects. The environmental implications of widespread mind uploading could be staggering. Digital consciousness would require substantial computational resources, potentially consuming energy at scales that dwarf current global production. Supporting billions of uploaded minds might necessitate energy infrastructure that poses significant environmental challenges unless accompanied by revolutionary advances in computational efficiency. Religious and spiritual perspectives introduce additional ethical dimensions to mind uploading considerations. Many faith traditions hold beliefs about souls, afterlives, and the sacred nature of biological existence that conflict with materialistic assumptions underlying consciousness transfer technology. These perspectives raise questions about whether digital copying could preserve whatever spiritual essence makes human consciousness unique and valuable. The consent challenges surrounding mind uploading present particularly complex ethical puzzles. Unlike conventional medical procedures, consciousness transfer would fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. Providing truly informed consent seems nearly impossible given our limited understanding of what digital consciousness might actually entail. The irreversible nature of many uploading scenarios means individuals might be committing to forms of existence they cannot adequately evaluate beforehand. Current research into brain preservation and scanning technologies continues advancing despite these formidable challenges. Cryonic preservation attempts to maintain brain structure by cooling tissue to extremely low temperatures, theoretically halting biological decay indefinitely. However, the freezing process itself causes significant cellular damage that might destroy the neural connections essential for consciousness preservation. Chemical preservation methods offer alternative approaches using specialized solutions to maintain brain tissue in stable glass-like states. These techniques can preserve cellular architecture at nanometer resolution for extended periods, but they face fundamental questions about whether static preserved tissue could ever be reactivated or whether dynamic aspects of consciousness would be permanently lost. The timing constraints for brain preservation create additional challenges. Neural connections begin degrading within minutes of biological death, creating narrow windows during which preservation procedures must be initiated. This temporal requirement has led some researchers to explore preservation protocols that could be applied to living individuals, raising profound ethical questions about the boundary between preservation and assisted death. Advanced scanning technologies represent the complementary component needed for mind uploading, providing means to extract information from preserved neural tissue. Current electron microscopy techniques can resolve individual synapses, but require brain tissue to be sectioned into thousands of ultra-thin slices that must be individually imaged and computationally reconstructed. The data management challenges associated with whole brain scanning push the limits of current information technology. Complete human connectome datasets would likely exceed exabytes of information, requiring storage and processing capabilities that challenge existing infrastructure. Converting raw structural data into functional neural models demands sophisticated algorithms that can infer computational properties from anatomical organization. Machine learning approaches show promise for accelerating reconstruction processes using artificial intelligence systems trained on brain tissue samples to automatically identify and classify neural connections. These techniques might reduce the human labor required for connectomy reconstruction from centuries to decades, though they introduce their own sources of error and uncertainty. As research continues across these multiple dimensions, the question of whether humans will ever upload their minds remains genuinely open. The technical challenges are unprecedented, the philosophical puzzles profound, and the ethical implications staggering. Yet the potential transformation of human existence drives continued investigation despite the formidable obstacles involved. The optimists point to exponential trends in computing power and rapid advances in neuroscience, suggesting that breakthrough solutions might emerge sooner than skeptics expect. The pessimists highlight enormous gaps in our understanding of consciousness and the unprecedented nature of the engineering challenges, arguing that mind uploading might remain forever beyond human reach. Perhaps the most honest assessment acknowledges that we venture into territory where current scientific knowledge provides limited guidance. We face questions at the intersection of neuroscience, computer science, and philosophy that challenge fundamental assumptions about consciousness, identity, and existence itself. What seems certain is that the pursuit of mind uploading continues driving advances in our understanding of consciousness, regardless of whether complete consciousness transfer proves achievable. Each attempt to map neural networks, simulate brain activity, or preserve neural information deepens our knowledge of the mind and reveals insights valuable, independent of their applications to uploading technology. The journey toward possible mind uploading represents more than technological ambition. It embodies humanity's enduring quest to understand consciousness and transcend biological limitations through scientific discovery and technological innovation. Whether this quest culminates in successful consciousness transfer or leads to deeper appreciation of biological awareness remains one of the most profound questions facing our species as we advance into an uncertain technological future. Future? The fundamental question of what would constitute sufficient preservation haunts every serious discussion of mind uploading. As our scanning technologies advance and our understanding of neural networks deepens, we confront an uncomfortable truth. We may never know exactly how much detail is truly necessary to capture the essence of conscious experience. Consider the molecular machinery operating within each neuron. Every cell contains thousands of different proteins, intricate signaling cascades, and dynamic genetic regulatory systems that influence information processing in ways we're only beginning to understand. Some researchers argue that consciousness emerges from these molecular interactions, suggesting that successful uploading would require preservation at nearly atomic levels of detail. Others contend that higher-level connectivity patterns matter more than specific molecular configurations. This uncertainty creates a profound challenge for anyone attempting to design preservation protocols or scanning procedures. Do we need to capture the exact configuration of every protein molecule? Or would mapping synaptic strengths be sufficient? The answer might determine whether mind uploading requires technology that won't exist for centuries, or whether it could be achievable within decades using approaches we can already envision. The distributed nature of human consciousness adds another layer of complexity to these considerations. Unlike computer programs that can be copied as discrete files, Consciousness appears to emerge from interactions between multiple brain systems operating simultaneously across different timescales. Your sense of self involves not just memory networks in the hippocampus, but emotional processing in the amygdala, executive control systems in the prefrontal cortex, and sensory integration areas throughout the cerebral cortex. These systems don't operate independently, but engage in constant communication that creates the unified experience we recognize as consciousness. Disrupting any single component can alter conscious experience in profound ways, as demonstrated by various forms of brain damage that selectively impair different aspects of awareness while leaving others intact. As we reach the end of this exploration into one of humanity's most ambitious questions, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of profound possibility and sobering uncertainty. The quest to upload human consciousness represents far more than a technological challenge. It embodies our deepest desire to understand the nature of mind itself and to transcend the biological boundaries that have defined conscious existence for millions of years. Whether we will ever succeed in transferring human awareness to digital substrates remains genuinely unknown, but the journey toward that answer continues to illuminate the extraordinary mystery of consciousness that we carry within ourselves every waking moment.